What if beauty becomes its own god? I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High.
While heaven burned, the Creator stayed silent. But why?
Before we begin this sacred reflection, we invite you to pause and breathe. If this channel has ever stirred something within you, a thought, a memory, a silent prayer, we kindly ask you to like, subscribe, and consider supporting Verse and Wisdom. Every gesture of support helps us bring deeper stories of light and truth into the world. Thank you for walking this path with us. May your heart be still and your spirit open. Now let us return to the throne room, where the light never fades, where a perfect creation began to fracture, and where a silent God chose to let it happen. In the beginning, before beginning began, there was only silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of fullness, a stillness that pulsed with unspoken glory. Time had not yet begun. Space had not yet been stretched. The stars had not yet learned to sing. And there, upon a throne of sapphire and light, sat the Word, not made, not born, eternally begotten. Jesus the Son, the radiance of the Father's glory, existing in perfect unity before anything was formed. Around him there was no need for creation, no angel choirs, no galaxies, no sky, only the brilliance of unshared majesty shared between Father and Son. They spoke without sound. They communed without motion. Their union needed no witness. It simply was. This is where the story must begin. Not in the fall, not in the fight, but in the fullness, in that sacred place before time, where all things were already known. He sat, clothed in garments of unapproachable light, not as a king among kings, but as the source of kingship itself. His eyes, though not yet gazing upon creation, held the blueprint of every sunrise. His hands, though not yet stretched in sacrifice, glowed with the power to shape worlds. His voice was the breath of being. And beside him the Father, infinite, invisible, indivisible, delighted in the Son. And the Spirit hovered, not yet over the waters, but over the idea of waters, the promise of form, the song of structure. Before there were questions, there was this answer. Before there was rebellion, there was relationship. The throne room was not crowded, it was complete, but love by its very nature overflows. And so came creation, not out of lack, but abundance, not out of necessity, but joy, not from emptiness, but from overflowing love. And from that throne, from that stillness, came light, the first word spoken, the first line written in the story of everything. Let there be. Galaxies spun from the edges of his voice. Time bowed to his command. Winds whispered their allegiance. And somewhere in the mind of God, even as he said, "Let there be light," he foresaw the shadow. For every light casts one. He knew. He knew that perfect beauty could be misdirected. He knew that freedom, though glorious, was dangerous. He knew that among the flames of worship, one spark could turn inward. And still, he created. Still, he envisioned the cherub, the one who would walk among the stones of fire, the one who would reflect divine beauty, the one who would get too close, Lucifer. But that is not where we are yet. First, we must pause and look, not at the fall, not yet. Look instead at the stillness, the silence, the source. Ask yourself, what does it mean to sit on a throne knowing that your masterpiece will choose to break? What kind of love makes that throne a gamble? He was not just any angel. He was the crescendo, the final note in the symphony of heavenly beauty. Lucifer, the morning star, the one whose presence made other angels pause, unsure whether to worship beside him or worship him. Scripture says he was the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. Not an exaggeration, a divine description, crafted not merely with function but with fascination. Gemstones lined his form, sardius, topaz, diamond, his voice like cascading waters through a canyon of gold. Lucifer was heaven's art, a moving, breathing cathedral, and Jesus made him. The Word through whom all things were created formed this creature with deliberate care. His wings stretched not just in flight but in worship, covering the holy throne. He walked amid the stones of fire, the holy precincts, where even the wind holds its breath. And there, near the very presence of the Almighty, he burned. Not with rebellion, but with radiance. He was for an age unknowable heaven's reflection. Where he moved, glory shimmered. Where he stood, light trembled. But mirrors too have edges, and sometimes the angle shifts just slightly. Lucifer began to see himself, not as the canvas, but as the artist. He watched how other angels glanced at him with awe. He felt the weight of his own splendor, and a thought like a whisper behind a curtain crept in. If I am so glorious, why must I bow? It wasn't thunder. It wasn't even defiance. It began as a tilt, a slow, imperceptible leaning of the soul, the kind you don't notice until the light changes. This was not war, not yet. This was the seed, pride in embryo. And Jesus saw every silent glance, every inner swelling of self. He watched the perfect mirror begin to fog from within. He did not interrupt. He could have. He could have reformed the cherub's heart with a thought, rewoven his nature with a whisper. But love does not manipulate. And freedom must be free even if it breaks the heart of heaven. Lucifer stood not only near the throne, he stood near the mystery of God's greatest risk, creating beings capable of loving him or leaving him. And for a time the mirror remained. He still worshipped, still flew, still sang. But the note was slightly off, like a harp just out of tune. Only the composer noticed. How long did Jesus watch? How many eons passed before the tilt became tremor? Before admiration turned into ambition, we do not know. But we know this: Lucifer was not destroyed at the first thought of pride. He was watched, understood, mourned. Because that is how Jesus deals with rebellion. Not with panic, but with patience. The day would come when Lucifer's thought would become a word, and the word would become a war. But that day had not yet come. For now, heaven still shined. But the most brilliant star had begun to flicker. Not outwardly, no angel saw it. Only the Word did. He who had breathed glory into the cherub now watched as that same breath turned into wind against him. And he did not yet raise a sword, because this story was never about force. It was always about freedom, even when it hurts, even when it breaks the mirror, even if it breaks the heart of heaven. The tilt was imperceptible. Lucifer, heaven's mirror, did not shatter in a moment. He shifted, not in action, not even in word at first, but in gaze. The slightest misalignment of vision, the smallest fracture of intent, he began to see himself, not as a servant, but as something more. The throne had always been the focal point. Every cherub, every seraph, every beam of heavenly light existed to reflect the glory that radiated from the Father and the Word. But Lucifer turned his reflection inward. He studied the shine on his wings, the brilliance in his voice, the gold embedded in his being, and called it his own. He was still beautiful, still radiant, but now he believed the light originated from him. And no one noticed, because everything on the outside was the same. Lucifer still sang. He still bowed. He still covered the throne. But now he noticed how long others bowed, how they glanced at him when he passed, how they paused at his voice. He noticed, and he liked it. The throne remained unchanged. Lucifer did not. He did not say, "I will rebel." He said, "I will rise." And the difference at first was linguistic, but in heaven, language is reality. Desire, when formed in the mind, echoes across the spirit like thunder in still air. Heaven heard the sound before it recognized the meaning. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Isaiah 14:14. The 5 declarations were not shouted, they were thought. But thoughts in heaven carry weight. Thoughts, when repeated in silence, shape the soul like wind shapes stone. And Jesus, eternal omniscient, still seated upon the throne, heard them all. Not one was a surprise. He knew the moment Lucifer tilted. He saw the moment the first drop of pride condensed on the glass of a once pure heart. And still, he waited. This is where we tremble, because we imagine ourselves in heaven and say, why not stop him? Why let the most beautiful one fall? Why allow rot to bloom in paradise? And Jesus answers not in thunder, but in mystery. Because love requires freedom, even in heaven, even among the perfect. Lucifer was not a malfunctioning machine. He was a sovereign spirit with a choice, to bow or to rise. And for eons he chose well. But then he chose again, and the throne did not blink. This was not passivity. This was war of another kind. Jesus, the Word, was not idle. He was watching, weighing, letting freedom speak. Because if he extinguished Lucifer, the moment pride stirred, all other beings would forever worship from fear, not love. They would bow, not because he is worthy, but because rebellion equals death. But Jesus, eternal strategist, wanted more. He wanted worship that had faced the alternative and still chosen him. So he let pride speak. He let beauty corrupt. He let heaven's mirror warp its reflection. And he grieved. The first tear ever shed in the cosmos was not by an angel. It was by the Word who saw love being slowly poisoned by ambition. But still, he waited. For love must choose, even when it breaks the heart of heaven. The silence before war is rarely quiet. In heaven it was stillness, wrapped in tension, a kind of sacred suspense. The kind that knows something is shifting beneath the surface, but dares not name it. The cherub still shone. His garment still glistened with every stone heaven could offer. But his song had changed. Not in lyrics, not in melody, but in intent. Worship is not merely sound, it is orientation, and Lucifer's was drifting. No longer did it rise from humility, it now reeked of performance. Notes meant to reflect began to attract. The hosts began to wonder. They didn't know what they were witnessing. No one had ever rebelled before. No angel had ever considered alternatives to obedience. The language for disobedience did not exist yet. Lucifer gave it form. He planted questions where there had only been awe. Why does God rule alone? Why must the Son be seated above all? Is glory not a shared thing? And still Jesus waited. Not because he was weak, but because freedom must be proven real in the fire of seduction. And so the test intensified. Lucifer moved from reflection to projection. He began speaking carefully, selectively. To angels in the corners of heaven's vastness, to the curious, the contemplative. He offered no outright mutiny, just ideas, observations, possibilities. The throne is eternal, he said, but perhaps its shape could change. And the Word heard it all. He knew when the ripple became a wave, when the first angel hesitated in worship, when another looked at Lucifer longer than the throne, when awe turned into admiration. He watched 1/3 of the stars dim, and still he waited. This is the cost of creating beings with will. To allow the beauty of love, you must risk betrayal. To grant worship its full meaning, you must permit disobedience to exist as an option. Jesus did not wait out of indecision. He waited because truth must be chosen, even by angels, especially by angels. And then the line was crossed. Lucifer stopped whispering. He proclaimed. He stood before the throne, before the fire, before the sea of glass and the seraphim, and declared, I will be like the Most High. not metaphor, not mischief, treason. Heaven convulsed, and Jesus stood, not to destroy, but to assign. He turned to Michael, not because he lacked power, but because every role had purpose. Michael would represent justice. Jesus would represent sovereignty. And so the war began not out of chaos, but out of order. Because heaven's war was never about strength. It was about authority. And authority had already decided. What does it mean for a being to fall when it stands in eternity? For Lucifer, the fall began not with descent, but with ascent, an inward rise and inflation. Pride does not enter like a storm. It seeps like a slow leak, quiet, steady, invisible, until everything collapses. The cherub's descent began when his gaze turned from the throne to the mirror. And the mirror tragically was built from the very gifts God had given him. Emeralds that reflected more than light, they reflected glory. Gold filigree that once testified of the Creator's craftsmanship now testified of Lucifer's self-regard. Each gem became a lens, each ornament a shrine. The more he beheld himself, the less he saw of the one who gave him breath. And this is the horror of corrupted beauty, it devours its own meaning. Lucifer did not stumble. He chose, deliberately, repeatedly. God did not make a mistake. The blueprint of Lucifer's soul had no flaw. There was no code error, no miscalculation in heaven's designs. The fall was not a glitch. It was a gamble. The Creator's greatest risk, building a being capable of denying him. And Jesus watched, not in paralysis but in patience. Each moment was a thread in a larger tapestry. Each act of rebellion, a darker stroke in a painting that would one day contrast the brilliance of mercy. Lucifer's corruption was never hidden from the sun. But stopping him would have been to strip the angels of trust. And trust once taken cannot be taught. It must be chosen. So Jesus allowed the thoughts to evolve. He permitted pride to stretch envy to breathe. Not because he was powerless, but because he was purposeful. Because what he was about to reveal required rebellion to reach its fullness. The gospel does not arise in sterile chambers. It is born in blood, in betrayal, in a garden and a cross. But before there could be Golgotha, there had to be heaven's fracture. Before he could redeem creation, he had to let it prove it could fall. And so, the Creator watched his masterpiece collapse. Eyes unblinking, heart unchanging, love unwavering. Because only such a God who knew Lucifer's first heartbeat could also carry the full weight of his final scream. Heaven did not shatter in an instant. The rebellion of Lucifer began not with thunder, but with a whisper, a slow and subtle discord woven beneath the music of eternal worship. Lucifer, once the radiant guardian of the throne, began to gaze too long into his own reflection. Each gem upon his body, topaz, sapphire, emerald, once created to reflect divine light, now fed an inward fire. His wings, crafted to cover the glory of the Most High, began to twitch with restless pride. He saw himself and thought, "Why bow when I could rise?" It began as silent contemplation. It matured into calculated persuasion. Lucifer did not scream his rebellion. He sang it. Seduction, not violence, was his first weapon. Why should God alone be exalted? He posed to the curious angels. Are we not also glorious? Do we not shine with his splendor? Is our worship not also worthy? To many it was blasphemy. To others it was intriguing. Lucifer spoke not as a tyrant, but as a liberator. He offered no war, not yet only enlightenment, a chance to rise, to think, to be more. It was the oldest heresy wrapped in the newest light. You shall be like God. Heaven trembled with questions, not because it lacked order, but because for the first time it faced choice. And Jesus, he did not storm from the throne. He did not shatter the deceiver with holy fire. He watched. He let the whisper continue. He let truth be tested, because love demands a choice. It was then that Lucifer crossed the line. He moved from suggestion to conspiracy, from inner conflict to outward campaign. He approached the throne not as a servant, but as a challenger. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, he declared, his voice thundering through the courts. I will be like the Most High. It was no longer a whisper. It was war. A third of heaven paused. The other two-thirds prepared for battle. Lucifer's brilliance had become shadow. The dragon had taken flight. And Jesus, still he remained seated, not as a passive king, but as the sovereign judge. To intervene early would be to undermine the free will he gave. To silence the rebellion before it fully unfolded would leave creation in doubt. Was God afraid? Was the accusation true? He gave Lucifer rope not to hang in wrath, but in truth. Michael the archangel rose at the word of the sun. His sword burned with righteous fire. The loyal angels rallied behind him. The celestial armies clashed starfire against starfire in a battle not just of power, but of allegiance. Revelation's words thunder through eternity. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. It was not a battle of equal forces. It was not creator versus creation. It was permission versus presumption. And Jesus still held the cosmos together. While swords flashed and dimensions trembled, galaxies continued spinning. Suns still burned. Oceans still stirred. Not a single atom lost its place because the word that created still sustained all things by his power. This was his judgment not by destruction, but by revelation. Lucifer, now the dragon, saw what he truly was, a creature, not a god. His wings could not reach the heights he claimed. His throne crumbled under the weight of its own pride. He was cast out, not just by might, but by truth. Jesus had not moved, and yet the throne had never been more active. It judged not with a sword, but with reality itself. To rebel against the Creator is to rebel against the source of existence. It is to declare war against breath, against light, against love. Lucifer fell like lightning, not just swiftly, but definitively. Heaven was cleansed. The song of the redeemed echoed anew, but the story was not over. Jesus, even in victory, did not boast. He did not celebrate the casting down of a former friend. His eyes, if such eyes could be described, were not proud. They were resolute and grieving, because this fall would not be the last. Lucifer may have been cast from heaven, but he would seek another throne, another garden, another creation. And the Lamb who had not yet walked the earth was already preparing his steps. Lucifer fell, but the story did not end with his descent. It was never just about rebellion. It was about replacement. Cast from heaven, he did not disappear. He descended with fury, with focus, and with a plan. No longer the guardian of glory. He became the accuser, the deceiver, the one who prowls the ruins of what he once reflected. And where did he go? To the only other stage being built, earth. Jesus had not yet taken on flesh, but the plan was already in motion. The garden had not yet bloomed, but the soil had been blessed. And in the unseen realm, the war had shifted theaters. Lucifer, now Satan could not dethrone God, so he would deface his image. If he could not sit in the seat of the Most High, he would corrupt the creation made in God's likeness. He would seduce those who bore his breath. He would twist beauty again just as he twisted his own. The sun watched. From the eternal throne, Jesus did not panic. He prepared. He saw the seed of mankind before it was planted. He saw Adam before his eyes opened. He saw Eve before her name was spoken. He saw the serpent coil around the branch before the fruit was ever plucked. And yet, he moved forward, because the plan did not change. Lucifer's fall was not an interruption. It was a setting, a backdrop for the greatest revelation the universe would ever behold. Love that bleeds, justice that bends, glory that stoops low. But before the cross, there was the curse. And before the curse, there was the choice. Lucifer, now robed in subtlety, did not charge into Eden with horns and fire. He whispered again. He had learned that temptation is not about force, it's about invitation. He echoed the same question he asked in heaven. Is God truly supreme? But this time he didn't ask angels, he asked humans. and the Word who had formed them from dust stood silent, not absent, present, but allowing. Because once again love must be chosen, even here, even now, even by the dust that breathes. The garden was breached, the fruit was taken. The echo of rebellion reverberated through Eden. Lucifer's triumph seemed near. The ones created in God's image deceived, disobedient, distant. But victory was an illusion, because what Lucifer did not understand was the paradox of paradise. The very fall he orchestrated had been foreseen, and more than that, prepared for. In the moments after the fruit was tasted and shame covered what glory once clothed, the voice of God did not thunder with annihilation. He walked. He called. Where are you? It was not ignorance. It was invitation. The Creator seeking communion, even in the shadow of betrayal. Lucifer must have recoiled, expecting wrath, finding pursuit. But what came next was more devastating to him than expulsion from heaven. It was the first prophecy, spoken not to Adam or Eve, but directly to the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Genesis 3:15, the proto-evangelium, the first gospel, the first glimpse of the cross, the first blow to Lucifer's strategy. A seed would come. From the very womb he had targeted. A child would be born, not just of woman, but for war. This seed would not just restore paradise. He would crush the serpent. Jesus, still enthroned in eternity, had set the plan in motion. And now, it had a timeline. Lucifer had stirred rebellion, but God had spoken redemption. The serpent's hiss would be silenced by the sun's heel. And once again, the gamble of love revealed its paradox, that even in the ashes of failure, grace sows a future. Lucifer had wounded creation, but Jesus had already written the cure. The golden halls of heaven once echoed with Lucifer's worship, his voice soaring, commanding beautiful. The symphony of praise wrapped in his wings, resounding across eternity. But now, silence. The void left behind was not just spatial, it was spiritual. Jesus remained on the throne, yet something deeper stirred in the unseen realm. Grief, not of surprise, but of knowing. The Creator who sculpted this being of splendor now watched his masterpiece unravel. And yet, he did not flinch. Because love, divine love, is not reactive, it is redemptive. Lucifer's rebellion did not diminish God's authority. It revealed it. While the heavens trembled, Jesus did not draw a sword. He sustained reality. He allowed the angels their war, not from impotence but intention, not from distance but design. Because the lesson heaven needed wasn't wrath. It was witness. Each angel watching the battle unfold wasn't just seeing violence, they were seeing consequence. The freedom they were given was not revoked. It was vindicated. Lucifer chose rebellion. God chose revelation. Jesus remained seated, not out of indifference, but as judge, as creator, as sustainer of all. His restraint was not weakness. It was the wisdom of eternity in action. He did not prevent the war. He transcended it. And in doing so, every soul in heaven would forever understand that love does not force loyalty. It wins it, one choice at a time. The celestial courts once echoed with the harmonies of perfect worship. Now the air thickens with tension. Jesus remains on his throne unshaken, but in the heart of the most beautiful cherub, something has broken. A mirror, once clear, once divine, now cracks silently within Lucifer's soul. The emeralds and sapphires that adorned his form, once reflecting God's glory, now catch and twist the light. No longer mirrors of worship, they become prisms of pride. The voice that once sang with choirs now murmurs questions. Why bow? Why serve? If I am this glorious, this wise, am I not fit for more? Jesus sees it all, but he does not raise a hand. He does not interrupt. He watches. This silence is not neglect. It is design. Each step of Lucifer's descent is allowed not because Jesus is weak, but because he is committed to something deeper than immediate obedience, freedom. Real love cannot be programmed, it must be chosen. And so Jesus lets the mirror crack. In Ezekiel 28 we read, "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you." That word "found" is piercing. It implies a discovery, a surfacing, like something hidden surfacing in a reflection. Iniquity was not placed there. It emerged, and the one who formed him saw it coming. This is where many struggle. Why would a perfect God create a being capable of imperfection? Why would the Son, through whom all things were made, give so much glory, so much access to a creature who could fall? Because in eternity's calculus, freedom is more precious than control. Lucifer's slow unraveling was not a surprise to Jesus. It was a sorrow known before time. In the fiery brilliance of the throne room, Jesus foresaw every crack in the mirror, every glance of self-admiration, every thought of self-exaltation. He saw the 5 declarations forming long before Lucifer spoke them aloud. And he let them form, because love must be tested to be proven. Loyalty must have the option of betrayal to be meaningful. As the sacred silence stretches, angelic eyes turn to Jesus. Some wonder, will he stop this? Others sense something deeper, something sacred. A lesson not just for Lucifer, but for all creation. The cracked mirror becomes a warning, a monument to what happens when creation forgets its place. And yet, Jesus does not shatter the mirror. Not yet. He allows the image to distort, the pride to grow, the rebellion to spread. Because only in allowing the fracture can the fullness of the plan unfold. Revelation 12 shows us the climax. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon was cast out. But that war didn't begin with swords. It began with a glance in the mirror, a whisper in the heart, a pride that went unanswered. Because Jesus chose not to react, he chose to redeem. This was the gamble. The Creator's greatest risk, to allow the possibility of rebellion in order to demonstrate the power of restoration. To let a mirror crack, knowing that one day a cross would restore what pride had shattered. Lucifer's fall teaches heaven something no forced obedience ever could. That worship without choice is hollow. That love without freedom is tyranny. And that even broken mirrors can become vessels of greater light if only they are surrendered. So Jesus remains, not passive, not indifferent, but resolved. Every moment of silence was a statement. Every delay in judgment, a declaration. That true authority does not need to shout. It does not need to dominate. It simply remains. And so when the cherub falls, the throne does not tremble. The cracked mirror has spoken its truth. But a greater truth is rising, one that will redefine power over eternity itself. Next, why create humanity at all? Was Earth just the next stage of the battle? Or the heart of the redemption? As Lucifer's ambition erupted into action, the silence of heaven fractured. Like a thunderstorm brewing behind the veil of eternity, the rebellion that once festered in the shadows now demanded center stage. The throne, the eternal center of divine order, did not tremble, yet the cosmos did. Lucifer stood not as the cherub who once covered, but as the dragon who now confronted. And in that confrontation we see the paradox of divine restraint. Jesus, the eternal word. Alpha and Omega remained seated, not out of indifference, not from weakness, but because true omnipotence does not react, it reigns. Heaven had never seen war before. Harmony was its breath, worship its rhythm, but now through the corridors of light and crystal seas, whispers turned to cries and cries became rallying calls. The once beautiful symphony of angelic unity broke like a mirror smashed by unseen hands. Michael was summoned not by desperation, but by decree. The archangel, robed in battle glory, received his orders not from panic, but from purpose. And Jesus, he watched. Still enthroned, still sustaining all things. His gaze pierced deeper than the immediate. While Michael unsheathed his sword, Jesus measured every ripple this war would unleash through eternity. And here the audience must pause. What kind of God creates a being he knows will rebel? What kind of creator watches his masterpiece unravel without stopping it? This is not divine negligence. It is divine chess played on a board spanning eternity. Every move seen before the first piece is touched. Lucifer's fall was not an interruption of the divine plan. It was woven into it. Not authored by God, but allowed, foreseen, and folded into a strategy far grander than rebellion. This is the throne and the tempest perfect stability amid cosmic chaos. Visualize it. Flames of judgment sparking across heaven's vaults, swords of light clashing mid-air. Angelic hosts splitting into legions of loyalty and defiance. And in the center, stillness. Jesus on the throne, eyes aflame with knowledge, mouth sealed with patience. Not even the rebellion of his most exalted creation could force him from his position. The book of Revelation reveals that Michael and his angels fought. But why not Jesus himself? Because the war of swords was never the true war. The true war was for hearts, for freedom, for truth to prove itself without coercion. If Jesus had crushed Lucifer instantly, worship would have turned to fear. Love would have turned to loyalty by force. And the universe would serve not a God of love, but a tyrant of survival. Instead, Jesus allowed the tempest to test the foundations of heaven. Not because he doubted them, but to reveal what only pressure can, the purity of choice. And this is where the viewer must reflect. The same Jesus who sustained the galaxies during celestial war sustains you in your inner battles. He does not always intervene to silence the storm. Sometimes he stays enthroned in your chaos, not absent, but allowing the storm to shape the truth inside you. The throne did not move. The throne cannot move. But everything around it was allowed to shake so that only what is unshakable would remain. Lucifer discovered something too late. That freedom does not make one equal to the Creator. That beauty without humility breeds monsters. That standing in the throne room does not make one worthy to sit upon the throne. And Jesus in silent divinity let the dragon fall. He let his wings beat with rage, let his voice poison ears. Let the third of heaven be seduced, not because he was unsure of victory, but because he was sure of love. Love must be chosen. And choice requires the possibility of rebellion. Every lightning strike of Lucifer's fury was permitted because Jesus knew one day a Roman nail would pierce the Redeemer's hands. One day the throne would empty not in fear but in sacrifice. And that moment would vindicate every divine pause, every heavenly restraint, every act of cosmic patience. But that moment had not yet come. For now Jesus remained. Still, silent, supreme. While the skies tore, he held the stars. While angels clashed, he maintained the laws of physics, gravity time. While creation watched its foundations tremble, the Word held the atoms in orbit with a whisper. This is not weakness. This is a throne unlike any ever imagined. A throne that rules not by interruption but by orchestration. Lucifer had his moment. Michael had his battle. Heaven had its war. But Jesus had the plan. And as the dust of rebellion settled and the dragon fell like lightning, that plan remained intact, unshaken, and utterly victorious. As the embers of heaven's first war faded, the stage of divine strategy shifted from the celestial to the terrestrial. Earth, a blue gem in the tapestry of galaxies, would now bear witness to the next chapter of God's eternal plan. The Creator's voice, which once commanded galaxies into being, now whispered into dust. From the clay of the ground, God formed man, Adam. Not a divine being, not an angel with wings or fire, but a creature of earth, fragile, finite, fallible. Yet into this dust, the breath of divinity was poured. The same breath that had sustained stars now animated a beating human heart. Why such a vulnerable creation? Why fashion beings with the capacity to fall again? The answer echoes from the throne room where Jesus once watched Lucifer's pride take root. Love without choice is not love. Worship without will is not worship. Earth would become the mirror where heaven's deepest truths would be reflected and tested. In Eden, the garden breathed perfection. Trees whispered in the breeze, rivers ran like liquid light, and peace blanketed every leaf. Adam and Eve walked in harmony with creation and with their Creator. Their freedom was complete, their fellowship unbroken. And at the heart of it all was a tree, two in fact, one of life, the other of knowledge. God's command was simple: eat of any tree but one. It was not about restriction, it was about reverence. It was not a test of obedience alone, but of relationship with the creation, trust the Creator's wisdom. This tree stood as a symbol of divine boundaries, a reminder that freedom thrives within design. But freedom invites the possibility of deception. Lucifer, now Satan the adversary, saw in humanity both opportunity and insult. How could dust bear divine image? How could fragile flesh carry favor he had lost? If he could not dethrone the Son in heaven, he would try to defile his image on earth. Disguised in subtlety, the serpent slithered into Eden, not with violence, not with horns or fire, but with a question. Did God really say? Doubt, not denial, was the wedge. Eve, deceived by the promise of wisdom, reached. Adam, with open eyes, followed. And in that single bite, rebellion echoed again, this time, not in heaven, but in human hands. The fallout was immediate: shame, fear hiding. And once again, Jesus watched. Not from surprise, not with panic, but with a heart already prepared to descend. The same hands that formed man from dust would one day be pierced to restore him. But before that redemption came consequence. God did not curse humanity alone. He cursed the ground, the serpent, the structure of perfection now fractured. Yet even in his judgment, mercy bled through. A promise whispered in the garden that the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head, not with immediate justice, but with a long, winding redemption. It was the first prophecy, the first gospel. Jesus, who remained on the throne during Lucifer's fall, would now begin weaving himself into the timeline of history. He would not only be creator and judge, but one day savior, born of a woman wrapped not in glory, but in flesh. The story of Adam was not the end of humanity, but the beginning of a divine rescue mission. From that day forward, every altar of sacrifice, every covenant cut in blood, every prophetic cry would echo Eden's fracture and Calvary's promise. The war was no longer between angels and swords. It was now within human hearts, between trust and pride, between the serpent's whisper and the spirit's core. Dust and divinity, entangled by design, would now become the battleground of eternal purpose. The war in heaven may have ended with Lucifer's expulsion, but its ripple had only just begun to cascade through creation. As the dust settled among the shattered echoes of rebellion, the Creator, still on his throne, turned his gaze from celestial sanctuaries to a barren, formless void. The earth, a place not yet teeming with life, but chosen for a divine collision between sovereignty and sin, between the sword that casts down and the seed that restores. The paradox that had incubated in eternity now moved toward manifestation. Lucifer's fall wasn't the end of divine engagement, it was the pivot point of an ancient design. A seed would soon be sown, and it would carry within it the antidote to the serpent's venom. But before Eden bloomed, the sword still hung in heaven, its blade not quenched, but patient. The seed that would crush the serpent. Genesis tells us in the midst of divine judgment, a promise was planted. A strange vow given not to Adam nor to Eve, but to the serpent himself. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Genesis 3:15. This was not poetic metaphor. This was prophecy spoken through clenched eternity. It was not merely a counterattack. It was a declaration of cosmic strategy. The Son who stood silent in the rebellion now promised to be born from within the very creation the adversary sought to corrupt. It was a divine gamble, yes, but one wrapped in omniscience. The seed would not emerge as a conqueror, but as a child, vulnerable, touchable, killable. To defeat Satan, Jesus would not descend with legions, but with lungs. He would be born through the same line now contaminated by sin. The Creator would enter the wound. The strategy was brilliant in its irony. Satan had hoped to destroy from above. God would restore from below. The Word would become flesh not merely to teach or heal, but to bleed. 2. The sword that would guard Eden. Yet even before the seed took root, the sword returned. So, he drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. Genesis 3:24. It's a haunting image, man clothed in shame walking east of Eden while heaven's gate closes behind him, guarded by the very beings he once walked among. The sword that had cast down Lucifer now turned to prevent fallen man from securing eternal corruption. This was not punishment, it was mercy disguised as steel. For if humanity had eaten of the tree of life in a state of sin, there would be no redemption, only eternal death wrapped in immortal flesh. The sword didn't just guard Eden, it guarded the possibility of the cross. 3. The long road to Bethlehem. The war in heaven had taken place in moments of divine time, but the plan for earth unfolded over centuries. The seed was promised, but centuries passed before the first echo of its heartbeat was heard in the womb of a virgin. In that delay, Satan danced. Kingdoms rose and fell. Idolatry spread like weeds. Prophets were murdered. The bloodline of promise was nearly extinguished time and again. Yet heaven watched not with anxiety, but with steady resolve. Every attack of the serpent, Pharaoh's massacre, Saul's jealousy, Herod's decree was a desperate attempt to sever the seed before it bloomed. But the seed had been planted in divine soil. The Word would become flesh not because Satan failed to stop him, but because Jesus willed to come even knowing what awaited. 4. Sword meets seed. The collision happened not on battlefields, but in a womb. Heaven entered humanity in a whisper. The same voice that shattered Lucifer's pride now cried as an infant. The hands that shaped stars now grasped a mother's finger. Jesus, the sustainer of all, now required milk to live. And Satan watched. The sword that had once cast him out now resided in the hands of Roman soldiers, of religious accusers, of the systems he had corrupted. And yet even surrounded by steel and scorn, Jesus did not flinch, because the seed had not come to avoid the sword, but to swallow it. V. From garden to Golgotha. In Eden, man had hidden among trees in shame. On Golgotha, Jesus would hang on wood in glory. The irony is surgical. The serpent who first whispered in a garden would meet his final wound from the seed of that same garden. Jesus didn't just reclaim Eden, he redefined it. At the cross, the sword pierced flesh, but it also shattered chains. It was there that Satan's final weapon, death, was turned against him. The heel was bruised, yes, but the serpent's head crushed. This was no accident, no improvisation. This was the throne's answer to rebellion, not annihilation, but incarnation, not wrath, but redemption. 6. The sword is passed. But the story doesn't end with victory. It ends with commissioning. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. Matthew 10:34. The sword that once guarded Eden now passed into the hands of his followers, not as a weapon of violence, but of truth. Not to destroy, but to divide light from shadow, spirit from flesh, lie from truth. Now the seed grows within all who believe. And the sword, it cuts deep not into enemies, but into hearts, separating what is temporal from what is eternal. Sing. The question that lingers. So now that we know the seed has come and the sword has struck, what does that mean for you? You are not merely a spectator in a tale of angels and cherubs. You are a battlefield. The serpent still whispers, the sword still cuts. The seed still grows, but the cross still stands. Long before Calvary, before Sinai, before even the first covenant was spoken between God and man, there was Eden. And in Eden, two voices whispered, one from the breath of the Creator, the other from the hiss of the fallen cherub. Their echoes still reverberate in every soul. Part 9 takes us back, not just geographically to Eden, but symbolically to the battlefield, where divine intention met defiant corruption. This part unveils how Lucifer, cast down from the heights, found his first terrestrial stage, and how Jesus, though not yet incarnate, was already present in word, in warning, and in woven grace. When the dust of the earth formed into man, it was more than creation, it was confrontation. Satan beheld this new creature with fury masked in curiosity. What was man that God was mindful of him, a being so fragile and yet so honored? A vessel of dust with the breath of the Almighty. Lucifer, still smoldering from celestial defeat, saw a new opportunity not just to attack creation, but to challenge the very image of God. The serpent was not chosen at random. Genesis presents it as the craftiest of all beasts. In Hebrew, the word arum, crafty, shares root with arumim, naked, creating an intentional literary tension. The humans were naked and unashamed. The serpent was crafty and veiled in deception. This was not merely a clash of intellect. It was a collision of innocence and manipulation. The scene in Eden was not a quaint garden stroll. It was a courtroom, a theater, a ticking time bomb. The enemy approached not with force, but with philosophy. Did God really say? With 5 words, he introduced doubt, not denial yet. That would come next. But doubt is the seed of rebellion. It cracks the foundation of trust. It unthreads the fabric of obedience. Jesus, the Word, by which all things were made, watched this unfold. And yet he did not intervene. Again, as in heaven, he allowed free will its full breath. Why? Because love coerced is not love. Obedience programmed is not righteousness. In the quiet of Eden, divine restraint screamed louder than thunder. Lucifer's strategy was not just to cause sin, it was to counterfeit intimacy. You will be like God, he promised. Not, you will be gods, but like him. The same ambition that dethroned him in heaven was now offered to man dressed in desirable fruit. And in that moment, Eve did not just bite into disobedience, she bit into the lie that God was withholding something better. This moment, often depicted as a tragic lapse, was in fact a divine setup, not for failure, but for revelation. God did not react to the fall, he had already anticipated it. The Lamb was slain from the foundation of the world. That is not poetic hyperbole. It is theological precision. The plan of redemption was not drafted in Eden, it was revealed through Eden. After the sin comes the call. Where are you? God's voice echoes not in ignorance, but in invitation. He knew their location, but did they know their own shame had relocated them? They were hiding not just from God, but from themselves. And Jesus, though not yet in flesh, was already in pursuit. The seed of the woman would one day crush the serpent's head. That promise, the proto-evangelium, was not poetic comfort. It was a battle cry. Consider this, the very ground that received the blood of Abel would one day receive the blood of the Lamb. The thorns that grew as a curse would one day crown the Redeemer. The skins God used to clothe Adam and Eve were not just a temporary cover, they were a type A foreshadowing a sacrifice. Blood was spilled in Eden to prefigure blood that would spill in Gethsemane. Jesus was present in the voice that cursed the serpent. He was hidden in the coats of skin. He was echoing in the wind that rustled the trees as Adam and Eve left the garden, not abandoned, but promised. Every tear they shed walking away was counted. Every ache of exile was recorded. And Lucifer, he believed he had won. He had infected God's new creation with the same poison that damned him, but he misunderstood again the nature of God. The enemy brought death into Eden, but Jesus would bring Eden into death. The resurrection would not merely reverse the curse, it would redefine it. Where sin abounded, grace would abound much more. Eden is not just history, it is prophecy. The tree of knowledge brought death. But the tree of Calvary would bring life. The first Adam hid in shame. The second Adam would cry, "Father, forgive them." The serpent struck the heel. The heel crushed the head. The cycle of rebellion that began in heaven and was transferred to earth would reach its climax not in wrath but in redemption. And what of us? We are the echo bearers. Every choice we make still reverberates the ancient question, did God really say? And every act of obedience, and every whisper of trust is a rebuttal to the lie spoken in the garden. The war that began in heaven did not end in Eden, but Eden unveiled its nature. It is not a war for thrones or galaxies, it is a war for hearts. And in that war, Jesus does not fight with swords, but with scars. His strategy is not domination, but demonstration, not conquest, but covenant. The echoes of Eden remind us we were always the battlefield, but we were also always the prize. The rebellion had been cast down, the cross had triumphed, the tomb lay empty, but the story did not end at the edge of victory. No, it pressed forward into eternity, into the fulfillment of a promise older than time itself. And now, at the very end, a new city rises not from the efforts of man, but from the heart of God. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Revelation 21:1-2. This is not restoration, it is recreation. Not a return to Eden, but a transformation beyond it. From the ashes of rebellion, from the scars of sacrifice, a radiant city emerges, echoing the glory of the Creator who once sat silently on his throne as his masterpiece unraveled. But now he moves. And so the curtain falls not on an ending, but on a revelation. You have journeyed with us through eternity, passed through rebellion and redemption from the throne of heaven to the cross on earth. You've seen that Jesus was never absent. He was always in control, always moving, always loving. If this message stirred your heart, don't let it stop here. Comment below what impacted you most, or simply type Amen to let the world know you believe in the victory of Christ. Like this video to help more souls discover this truth. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because more journeys of divine truth are coming and you won't want to miss them. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for your time, your faith, your courage to explore the depths of the greatest story ever told. Until next time, may grace sustain you, may truth guide you, and may love surround you. See you in the next revelation.